Hello, Sophie here. So I'm an illustrator, and since fall of last year, I've been creating pieces with grease pencil, but I recently realized that my history with Blender goes back farther than that. So before we get started, I do just want to mention that I have started working on my first big tutorial video. I'm going to be sharing how to make and animate a horse skeleton, basically like how I did for this piece. And so I've decided to start with that because I've honestly gotten so many comments from people saying that they'd be curious to see how I made it. So truly, if there's anything you'd like to see me cover, please do comment it, and I keep track of what people are interested in. So that's going to be a bit of a beast to get done. So for this week, I wanted to do something a little more casual, a little more laid back. Also, I'm using my brushes, testing them out on 3D surfaces. And you can download my watercolor brush pack for free. The link will be at the top of the description box. It's through Gumroad, so you can pay what you want. Donations help me keep making videos, and a massive thank you if you've already left a tip. But yes, I will let, for the first time ever, past Sophie explain what we'll be doing today. So I was digging through some of my old computer folders, and in my folder that was my painting documents, I realized I had a Blender folder that I completely forgot about. So this is all from the beginning of 2020. And so I opened up this blend file. So the idea behind this one, it was for Draw This in Your Style that Cheyenne Barton was holding at the time. And I have quite a few blend files from this time. I was very much a 2D gal, still am. But I was really curious about trying out some 3D sculpting. But all of these initial Blender projects pretty much fizzled out after the very, very basic sculpting stage because I had no idea where to go from there. I knew that texturing was a thing. It just never really felt like something that I wanted to do. And so now looking at this, it's just wild to me that this is exactly, maybe not exactly, because this is still over a year ago, but this is the kind of base that I would start with for one of my 3D pieces that I would do now. So I think I want to take this mesh that I made over a year ago, and I think I'm gonna give myself the challenge of not sculpting anything else. So taking this and only by adding grease pencil, turning it into a final piece. Hey, thought I would quickly update you. So what you're probably seeing me do now is I'm basically taking every mesh and I'm turning them into a grease pencil object just by hitting F3, and then I search for convert, and then I select the one that's convert to grease pencil. I check the box that says keep original, and I I click the box that also says only seam edges. I don't use the lines anyways, so technically my meshes have no seam edges, so no lines get drawn. So this is just, so the whole thing feels a bit less confusing because all I want at this point is the fills. And yeah, then you're just seeing me copy them to my grease pencil object, my main one, and then I reorder them so that they're at the bottom so that the line art shows up on top of them. And basically, I convert these into grease pencil objects so that later on I can use them as masks. Because right now with the line art, the brush strokes are quite small in radius, but later on, with the watercolor layer, those strokes are going to be pretty huge. And so I use the masks to make sure that they stay within the part of the drawing that I want them to stay in, even when I'll be rotating the object. I definitely want to make a more detailed tutorial on this eventually, but now you're just getting some sneak peeks at my process. And yeah, I think it's looking super cute. I'm mostly just copying Cheyenne's style and recreating it into a 3D piece rather than necessarily making it my own style, especially, I don't even really draw characters that much myself. But no, I think this style lends itself so beautifully to 3D. And I'm just excited to keep working. So just tried something for the first time and I thought I would share. So normally in my pieces so far I've kept the 2D elements and the 3D elements their own thing. But for this one, I really wanted to try integrating some 2D elements with the 3D. So you can see like the hands are 2D and the pants are 2D, and I'm gonna do all the flowers in the background in 2D. Basically, my idea stemmed from I wasn't liking how the pants were looking when I rotate around the character. I was like, okay, can I get like some of the 2D elements to follow the camera? So I tried parenting it, did not work as expected. So I realized that I kind of wanted to essentially parent just the rotation, but not the location. So yeah, I did a bit of digging online, a bit of research, and I found that you can use object constraints, which is not something that I've really used at all before. All right, so it was late, and past Sophie tried her best to explain, but it'll just make more sense if I interject. So in order to parent only the rotation, what I wanted to use was the copy rotation object constraint. And so I moved all of the 2D elements that I wanted to follow the camera rotation into their own grease pencil object. I gave this object that constraint, and I assumed I could set the camera as the target object. Nope. So basically, the origin of my grease pencil object is at the world origin. All transforms are at 0, which I want, but the same can't be said about my camera because it's actually placed in space. Its rotation values are not 0, so if I set the camera as the target object for the constraint, my grease pencil object gets that rotation. And so I realized that I wanted my grease pencil object to only copy the rotation that the camera will do when it pans around my final piece. So I had to make an empty, making sure that, like my grease pencil object, all the transforms were set to 0. And then I parented the empty to the camera, and then I made the empty the target object for the copy rotation constraint. But in conclusion, here is what it's looking like when I'm gonna be rotating the camera. I'm undecided if I like it. I think it'll make more sense when there's more 2D elements that are also gonna be rotating. I'm interested to see. We'll keep you posted. So I was really liking the rotation effect, the more 2D elements I added, but then I ran into the roadblock of them intercepting with my meshes. So I've talked about this before, but I keep my meshes, and usually at the end I give them a holdout material so that they hide the strokes on the other side of the object. So something I tried, and maybe this will show up in the footage, is that I found what's called a limit rotation constraint. And I gave this to the empty, which, as the name suggests, limits the rotation so that, in effect, the 2D objects would only rotate with the camera rotation to a certain degree, to a degree that I set. Ultimately, though, it felt kind of off, and so I didn't end up keeping this. And instead, I dealt with the mesh interception by just moving the location of the grease pencil strokes in 3D space, which is actually a nice segue into my next roadblock. So the flowers were getting drawn in front of the hands, even though the strokes were placed behind them in 3D space. And I realized I didn't know how grease pencil strokes are layered in 3D space when you have multiple grease pencil objects. So when you have just one grease pencil object, by default they follow the order of the layers. There's another option, but I personally never use it. So it turns out that with multiple objects, it has to do with the origin of each grease pencil object. So moving the origin of one grease pencil object in front of the other made the strokes of that object appear in front, regardless of location in 3D space. And so since I wanted the flowers to appear in front of the character but behind their hands, I needed to move their hands into their own new grease pencil object. And what's really cool about this is that, like I mentioned, I moved some of the 2D elements forward in 3D space so that they wouldn't intercept with my 3D meshes. But because of this trick I discovered with the grease pencil objects, they still appear behind the hands, even though they're not technically behind the hands. It's magic. Basically, it's magic. So I just finished it. I'm still too into it. I'm not quite ready to say how I feel about it, because I don't know. But it definitely fulfilled the challenge I gave myself, which was to take this mesh from January 2020 and to only using grease pencil and what I've been doing these past months turned it into a final piece. So in that sense, it was a success. So I showed it to my partner today, and so he wasn't a fan of the flowers, like specifically the ones behind the hands that were essentially moving all over the place. And yeah, I could totally see what he means. So I ended up moving those flowers into the same grease pencil object as the hands. And so there's no rotation constraint on these. And I definitely think it makes a lot more sense to have like those flowers follow the drawing and follow the hands, because I mean, it is, I guess, meant to be like the character is holding those flowers specifically. So for a final touch, I just turned the opacity of those fill layers, you know, the ones I converted from my meshes and then copied to my 3D grease pencil object to use as masks. I turned their opacities to 0 because I don't want them to actually show up. I just want them to be masks for the watercolor layer. And it's really cool. They won't function as masks if you actually click off the eye icon. But if you keep the eye icon visible, turned on, and you just turn their opacity to 0, they don't show up, but they still function as 3D masks, which, like I talked about at the beginning, is great for containing those gigantic watercolor strokes. And so by turning the opacity to 0, this would also let any paper texture show through these areas where the watercolor and the pencil strokes aren't fully opaque, which admittedly, like, there isn't a lot of in this piece, but it's still a really cool effect that I love using all the time. So I think I'll let tomorrow Sophie wrap this whole thing up. So yes, I am indeed a bigger fan of it this morning. Of course, I made some more changes. I really wasn't a fan of the camera movement, panning around the character, and that's always something that I find really difficult to do. So the best solution that I have found for me, and I'll link it below, is a video that explains how to animate your camera by using the auto keying function and having your camera follow your view. I think it's a great solution. I have gotten the best, quickest results from using it, but the downside is that you really don't have much control over the animation once the keyframes are down. Trying to go in and scale or do anything to the keyframes kind of breaks the whole animation. But like I said, it's the best solution I have at the time. I also added a node in the compositing workspace, the RGB curves node, and I bumped the red value up a bit and the blue value down a bit to give the whole thing a slightly warmer feel to match the illustration. So I hope you enjoyed this, maybe learned some new approaches you could try. It was definitely an experience for me, just picking up and filming, no script or plan or anything. This kind of video definitely won't become the main thing on my channel, but it's still a fun casual video style and I wouldn't mind doing it from time to time. So I'd be curious to know if you're a fan of these more casual kind of videos. You can find me everywhere at Sophie Jantak. Liking and subscribing would help me out so much. And as always, thank you for being here. Talk soon.